Namaskar and welcome to Sunset Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the issue of urban planning in India. In fact, Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Wednesday said that well-planned cities are going to be the need of the hour in the fast-paced environment of India in the 21st century. Addressing a post-budget webinar on urban planning, development and sanitation, he said that development of new cities and modernization of services in the existing ones are the two main aspects of urban development. Prime Minister highlighted the significance of urban development in every budget of the country, informing that an incentive of 15,000 crore rupees has been declared in this year's budget for the standards of urban development, and also expressed confidence that it will provide much needed impetus to planned urbanization. He also reiterated the significant role of planning and governance in urban development, pointing out that poor planning of cities or lack of proper implementation after planning is done can create huge challenges in the development journey. So today we'll try and understand all these aspects, specifically what is the criteria for good planning in urban development, how can it be implemented in a proper way, and what are the challenges here, specifically vis-a-vis the aspects of circular economy and they're dealing with the challenges of waste management and other such related aspects as well. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Dr. K.K. Pandey is joining us. He's Professor Urban Management at IIPA. We also have with us Mr. Sudhir Krishna, former Union Secretary with the Ministry of Urban Development, and Jaya Dhindo is also joining us, Director, Integrated Urban Planning with WRI India. Welcome, all of you, to Sunset Television. I'll first begin with trying to understand the why of it, and then perhaps, we can dwell further into the how part. And when we talk about why, Jaya, I'd like to begin with, why is urban planning so crucial and so important in today's time and age?
Thank you, Vishal. So basically, I think when we look at why urban planning is so crucial, it has to do with the three challenges that the Anthropocene is facing today, the three interconnected central, challenges of the present time. One are mitigating and adapting to climate change. The second is how do you protect biodiversity? And the third is how do you ensure human well-being? And all of these are central to ensuring not only our well-being, but basically our survivability. And for all of this, multidisciplinary approach like urban planning is needed. Cities, again, they form 3% of our land area in the country, but they contribute over 60% to the economy of the country, to the GDP. Not only that, cities are also going to be the place where the war on climate change will be won or lost. That's why getting cities right, getting urban planning right is absolutely crucial.
Okay. Mr. Krishna, not only your views on why it is important, but also the Prime Minister, in his address pointed out that we have not paid enough attention towards urban development, in the past years, specifically post-independence. So where has the problem been? With planning or with implementation?
Well, I think the major issue with the cities is lack of good governance. The governance framework in the cities need to be revisited. And the first attention given to cities governance was through the JNNURM. In about 2006, around 2006, the JNNURM mission was launched with focused attention on the governance reforms in the cities. And that led to some success. And of course, there were lessons to be learned also. So followed by that, the Amrut mission was launched and the smart city missions were launched. So some efforts have been made, all right. But I think a lot of attention is required in making the cities having good governance. Today municipalities are in common understanding, municipalities are the governing authority for the city. But on ground, it is not so. In addition to municipalities, there are parallel players like development authorities, and there are other, revenue department. The district collector continues to play a significant role in cities. And then there are authorities like Urban Shelter Improvement Board, and the water board is there, and so on and so forth. So therefore, I think and this leads to this multiplicity of governing agencies, make the city planning as kind of somebody who has to implement it, right? Who has to implement the city plan, and everybody has to implement, but there is no authority, single authority to manage a city plan, both in terms of the plan and its execution to the details. So I think it is high time
Okay.
that city planning is important and has to be given attention, but governance of the city also requires attention.
Okay, okay. So it's not just planning and implementation, but also the governance structure, which is equally important. That's what Mr. Krishna is pointing out. I'd like to bring you in, Dr. Pandey, here. And Dr. Pandey, everybody, all the experts point out that yes, urban development is very important. Most of the population would also of the view of shifting to urban centers in search of better opportunities also. But the key and crucial part is planning, its management, as Mr. Krishna was pointing out. So how would you analyze the journey so far of our cities?
Our journey so far has been that planning has been detached from the implementation. Most of our cities, including Delhi, a major part is developed through illegal land subdivision or encroachment or beyond the formal system. So there is a need to bring the urban development in line with the planned framework. We have around 461 million people living in urban areas, and by 2047, another 416 million people would be coming to urban areas. So we have to properly plan that these people have adequate place to live, adequate connected mobility, and other infrastructure. At the same time, the existing areas which have been developed without the proper planning needs to be taken up for augmentation of infrastructure and services in a planned manner. That is why planning is important for both, for existing areas and for the new areas to be developed in our urban centers.
Okay, okay. Mr. Krishna, most of our existing, infrastructure in our existing cities, the basic infrastructure is overburdened. When we talk about, sewage facilities, when we talk about, the water pipelines or the way electricity lines are, connected in these parts of the cities. How do we deal with this twin challenge? One, further plan it, the expansion of these cities in a very planned manner, and deal with improving the existing infrastructure as well.
Yes, actually, this is a very good question you have raised, and solution is also not very difficult. In terms of, for example, you mentioned about sewage system. Of course, cities have to grow vertical. So many of the existing developments, which are habitats which are old and dilapidated, have to be converted into multi-story areas in a planned manner, of course, in a systematic and planned manner. And that would put extra load, especially in the transit-oriented development, if you allow extra floors and allow extra commercial activities in erstwhile residential areas or mixed land use. So it will put extra load on the infrastructure, no doubt. But some of the infrastructure can be tackled in a different way than what we have been pursuing so far in most cases. For example, localized, decentralized management of waste. The sewage management need not be done centrally at all. Sewage management can be and should be done in a localized manner. So you don't have to overload the sewage infrastructure, which is there from before, just because we are going vertical. Mm-hmm. Local sewage treatment plants cost less because they require less of pipeline network, and treated water can be used locally in gardening and in construction activities and avenue plantation, etc. Though I'm not very sanguine about using the recycled water within the household, but anyway, that is another matter for discussion. But similarly, the solid waste also to a good extent can be recycled and reused locally.
Okay.
So that leaves us majorly with the drinking water supply. And the drinking water supply, if the recycled water is used locally, then the available drinking water supply need not be substantially, disturbed. Some improvement will be required, but may not be substantially disturbed or augmented very significantly to take care of development. And lastly, the mobility network. Mobility network has to be improved by going in for comprehensive integrated mobility planning. Walkways, etc., have to be developed. Otherwise, people are taking to road to automobiles at the drop of the hat because there is no proper walkway. So people have no proper way to take even bicycle out. So you have the option only left to take your two-wheeler or four-wheeler on the road. So that is creating another issue which can be tackled. and some cities have taken initiative. But so therefore, the development of cities, existing cities, redevelopment of existing cities, need not really put a very big challenge unless if we tackle it very carefully and in a systematic manner.
Okay. Jaya, would you agree on these two aspects? Of course, there are various issues when we're talking about urban planning and development and its implementation as well. But majorly, one is dealing with the issue of waste management, both solid and the other waste management. And two is, planning it from a transport point of view, public transport point of view as well. So these two are very key focused elements of the urban planning. Would you agree?
I think, Vishal, I would like to take this a level above. So while, when you look at sectoral areas, so waste is important, transport is important, buildings are important, they are the largest consumers of energy, the largest sort of emitters of, GHG emissions. So all of these are important, but I think this needs to be taken at a higher level where we look at how can we create and implement a national urbanization policy, which kind of is a policy umbrella that guides and allows states and cities to adapt to their needs, their issues, their ambitions, because the issues in each city might be different. If you ask me in Bangalore today, which is the biggest burning issue, it's transport. Whereas in another city, it could be waste and so on and so forth. So I think the idea is that how can you look at implementation and institution of a national urbanization policy, which looks at many different aspects and cross-sectoral aspects of urban planning. So the first thing I think would be like looking at, typologies of urbanization. Right now, we just say India, for example, is 33% urbanized. That's it. And we are treating a million plus cities at the same status and with the same policy lens that we are, 50,000 plus towns and cities, which are also urban. Now, can we look at not just population, but also other socioeconomic factors for classification? That's one. When we're talking about infrastructure, whether it relates to transport or waste, can we look at spatial planning and integrated infrastructure development? Looking at regional scale, because some of this infrastructure, some of these resources talk about regional language. So water, air, they follow watersheds, airsheds. They're not confined to administrative boundaries of cities. So how do you recognize, how do you, give cognizance to these urban, rural, and these sort of ped shed and, these kind of resource shed implications? Looking at land use transport is very important. How do you do that in an integrated way, which creates, compact and connected city forms, which not only help with land efficiency, but also in deriving economic value and, create these value capture opportunities for cities. So that's one. And then the other one is also looking at economic development in tandem with inclusive development. The sort of World Cities report last year clearly mentioned that the success of cities, towns will depend largely on policies that protect and sustain or leaving no one behind. So we cannot afford to leave the other half behind, whether it is the ones below poverty line, the ones without access to urban services, unemployed youth, or women who are outside of the workforce participation, right? So I think there are those. And then, of course, there's the issue of urban resilience. We've talked about green growth a lot. There's been a lot of mention of that in the budget and, in the Prime Minister's speech. How do you link green growth and urban resilience? You talked about circular economy. How do you make that happen? There are existing programs like Swachh Bharat, Amrut, Jal Shakti Abhiyan. These are opportunities to implement, for example, circular economy solutions. And, looking at sort of disaster management. Every city these days is facing one or the other climate disaster, one after the other, and we just seem to have no respite. So how can you, move from disaster management, which mandates state and district level, basically implementation and recommendations to city level, and look at moving from a rescue and recovery approach to that of preparedness and resilience. So I think there are many threads attached to this, notion of infrastructure integrated development, and how we unravel all of that is very crucial. Okay.
It's going to be really, really crucial. Dr. Pandey, management, the urban management and management of resources when we're talking about, of course, at the planning stage, due notice has to be taken care of all aspects, then the implementation part. But when it comes to management of resources, it becomes really important, taking all those aspects which both Mr. Krishna and Jaya were referring to, be it the transport resources, be it the land resources, the water resources as well. How do we ensure that? Because that's becoming a larger challenge, and specifically with larger cities, with metropolitan.
One most important part is the assets. Municipal bodies have assets which are in the form of resources, and they really do not know how many assets they have. Double entry accounting has been introduced, but a recent report of Niti Aayog says that it is not really practiced in the line and spirit of double entry accounting system. So first they know the assets, they value them, classify them, and they see the potential, what revenue is coming from each of asset. What is the potential in different assets to raise revenue? So that asset management exercise in all the towns to better manage the resources which they have. This will also involve, there are many assets like land already occupied by city governments, but their ownership title is not given to them by state. That is state land is still even now. So that transfer of title is very important.
Okay. Indeed, that aspect is equally important there. Mr. Krishna, since Dr. Pandey spoke about the asset management and revenue as well, in fact, that's also one of the major important points. You, in the first response, you spoke about how the governance infrastructure or the governance mechanism has to be, further improved, brought in line with the time as well. That also brings in another question of finances, of money, because if a city is that big and it is to be managed properly, then how do we deal with the financing part also? Most of the local bodies are seen to be struggling with that.
Actually, we have got shining examples among the cities in our country. Often we find, we study what is happening in cities abroad, how they manage their finance. But I think we have got very good local examples, excellent examples. A historic example is the New Delhi Municipal Council. You see, after all cities are built on land only, but how they manage the land and how the land management is assigned to the municipalities is very crucial. In case of New Delhi Municipal Council, what they have done is, over the years, whatever land they had, they built out for various activities. And most of the big hotels in Delhi are built on the lands which are leased, most means quite a few, rented out, leased out by the NDMC. And the NDMC, after 30-year lease, and after 30 years, the lease is substantially hiked and the NDMC is practically rolling in money. And what you see, the roads and everything in Delhi, very good. I mean, one of the examples, and similarly, the upcoming financially smarter cities are also there. Like Indore, Indore has improved itself over recent times. It was not like this before, and they have issued the municipal bond also, which the budget of 23 has talked about municipal bonds. Indore has shown in the recent times. There was one round of municipal bond culture introduced in the JNNURM regime. It was started, but somehow before JNNURM rather, and when the budgetary resources started flowing, then municipalities lost interest in making efforts for going to market to raise funds, and they started, joining the beeline for the government budgetary support. But now a renewed interest has come. That is second part. And thirdly, so therefore, what I would say is, Government of India and state governments, a time has come that they should think of transferring their land bank to the municipalities, with of course conditions that they should use it in a whatever way that gives them sustainable sources of revenue, rather than giving grant from time to time, which will be like, proverbially, you give somebody a fish who takes fish to eat, or teach them how to fish, which is more sustainable. Similarly, the municipalities are given resource in terms of land, which they can capitalize on a sustainable basis, rather than depending on the grant. Okay. And thirdly, I would say that the role of municipalities in the governance structure, the budget talked and I mentioned about street vendors and so on, giving grant, PM Swanidhi, of giving financial resources of easy loan and so on to the street vendors. You talk to street vendors, money is not the major problem for them. And even for citizen also, the street vendors are necessity, but in a most messy environment. The program is there, Street Vending Act is there. There has to be a street vending plan to be prepared for the city. But who shall prepare, how it shall be implemented, that has been given a go by. And therefore, street vendors are where they are. And what we are doing is just putting some money in their pocket, which is the somewhat least of their problem, because then there is no place to do street vending in a systematic manner. Either are able to exploit their capacity to the maximum, nor the city gets any benefit. It looks very shabby. And off and on, they are at the mercy of police and local authorities for being unauthorized in a squatter here and there. And if you regularize them in a haphazard manner, so therefore the municipalities, when the act is there, after a lot of effort, this street vending regulation act was made after massive effort, consulting everybody online. So these are the things, the municipalities must be given the pivotal role in urban planning. Of course, in some areas, municipalities will have to be placed subservient. For example, the drainage plan. When the rainwater falls, it doesn't fall, it doesn't flow out or doesn't come into the city just within the city, or doesn't go out within the city. It comes from outside the city and goes outside the city. So therefore, certain activities, similarly, mobility planning also has to be regional as well, because interconnectivity of the city with the mufassil areas surrounding smaller towns, satellite towns, villages is very crucial. So certain activities have to be regional in nature with a strong local framework. Like I said, that drainage plan is number one layer in planning, mobility planning is the number two layer planning, and so on. There are layers in planning. And so with these local, but subject to these overarching plans, the municipalities have to be grounded as the sole authority. Laws must be there, but implementation should be by the municipality, subject to, of course, accountability and capacity building and so on and so forth. So rather than creating newer and newer agencies, now the development in smaller city, this budget has talked about tier 2 and 3 cities. Tier 2 and 3 cities, the governance is, the municipalities are overwhelmed by the development authorities. The development authorities have huge money with less responsibility to local people. The municipalities have huge responsibility to local people with very less resources. In 3 cities I am talking. I'm not talking about cities like Mumbai or other major cities. Tier 2, 3 cities have a serious challenge of governance. So I think it is high time that we focus on the regional planning and local planning and strong review, urgent review of the role of the local governance bodies like the municipalities.
So that takes care of various aspects as well. Jaya, one last final question before we bring this to an end, because the Prime Minister, in his address in that webinar, exhorted the experts like all of you are present on the show here to come up with innovative ideas. Areas like GIS-based master planning, other aspects of planning as well. What more can we think of in terms of urban development planning, wherein new and innovative ideas can perhaps come up with ingenious solutions?
I think 3 things is what I'll say. One, I think in terms of, I'll start with financing because that's where Dr. Krishna, ended. I think one is that, can we look at integrating all the urban missions, pool their funding, and give cities and urban areas the ability to prioritize and determine their own future. So some urban regions can be growth-centric, while some can be equity-centric, focused on human development in areas that may not provide economic returns, but will lift the flow. So basically, can we look at providing basic urban services to all? In that merit, how do we look at involving the private sector and using their expertise in, urban planning? How can we engage MSMEs? India is the second largest hub of innovation, and there's a lot happening in the private domain for public good. But how do we mainstream it? How do we bridge the gap between innovators and cities, make the onboarding process of innovation easier, and enable good business models, that don't penalize innovators for engaging with cities in the public sector? Then there is the use of, like you said, technology and AI is to develop robust baselines. A lot of our cities are, missing baselines, whether it is a basic land use, land cover plan, or something data on climate, and the various sectoral emissions. Can we use technology and AI to help these cities, especially the smaller ones which have limited capacities? And then finally, I think on the capacity issue itself, there are a couple of things. One is, how do we develop urban planning capacity better? One is training of existing officials to acquaint and equip them with contemporary tools and methods and problem-solving skills, like systems thinking instead of a narrow sectoral focus.
Indeed.
And then build capacities at different urban scales, regional, local, which are not necessarily constrained to administrative boundaries. Second, how do we improve urban planning educational curriculum? Make it more relevant to the challenges that we are faced with in the present time. And I think the third very important thing is, can we invest more in interdisciplinary research and development, which is contextual to developing Indian knowledge systems on low carbon, inclusive, resilient, development, which in turn produces top quality urban planners and also gives planning its rightful status.
Okay.
Making planning a lucrative career option so that people will go for it, and it's not a simple academic exercise or a good to have.
Indeed.
So I think all of this needs to happen, and then we can create that ecosystem where urban planning can become about not just good growth, but also about ensuring human well-being, planetary good, and survivability, and that can bring innovation to the myriad problems that we have in front of us.
Indeed. That takes into account all aspects of urban development, from the planning and from the execution perspective as well. Thank you so much, Jaya there, Mr. Krishna and Dr. Pandey as well, for sharing your valuable inputs with us and our viewers as well as our experts for pointing out various aspects of the planning and implementation when we talk about urban development, governance reforms as well, looking at finances also, the challenges which exist today and the kind of challenges which we have to deal with the changing times also. We'll keep a close watch on this sector and keep on bringing you detailed views from other topics, other aspects as well. Till then, keep watching Sunset Television. Thank you.